and rebuild. Let's get into the real facts and chill. Go ahead and tell them where we at. Destroy and rebuild. From your average show, we break down multiple ways to grow. Destroy and rebuild. Now let the ancestors speak. This African state of mind is not complete. Destroy and rebuild. No longer taking secondary. It's freedom by all means necessary. Destroy and rebuild. 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 We broadcast live and direct. Chills put the ground working full effect. Die circumstances demand your respect. It's time to advance, something more than a check. I got my eyes open wide enough to see the threat. Liberation is promised, the fight I won't forget. So grab your pen and pad, be sure to take notes at this moment in time. Cause information is coming that'll free your mind.
Go. No, I'm gonna stand this. I'm not. I would actually. I would also like to ask if the vendors would like to come and join us too. We want to get all the spirits in the building to be a part of this experience. Beautiful. What makes me most comfortable is to stay as connected to my most current ritual. I do rites of passage in the public schools, and every day we do libations for my young men, and we do a lot of mantras. Mantras make, it just allows us to connect. It brings the energy into the space. So I'm gonna take you through a couple mantras, and then we're gonna begin the libations, okay? So we typically say, how about this? Our program is called the Sankofa program. So Sankofa is a down in West African term, meaning go back and fetch it. So we say, when I say, sisters, are you ready? I want you to say Sankofa ready. And when I say, brothers, are you ready? You know, brothers, I need to hear your voice. All right? Sisters, are you ready? Sankofa ready. Brothers, are you ready? Sankofa ready. Everybody, family, are you ready? Sankofa ready. Feels good, don't it? At least, there it is. All right. So, if everybody can calm their hearts, their minds, and their spirits. Begin to let go whatever happened outside, at home, in your work life. Begin to remember those who came before us. In this space, we affirm the all. And we understand that there are many religions and many faiths and many beliefs. But we know where the source is, and we know where all those beliefs and faiths come from. Baba Carruthers told us that throughout traditional and basic Africa, there was a cultural continuity throughout all those traditional spaces. Even though it might have been said differently, the dance might have been a little different, the music might have been a little different, there was this continuity that connected all things. And so we carry that same essence today in this modern time. So we would first like to give honor to the first spirit, the first ancestor who came out of those primordial waters. We honor the creator who goes by many names. In ancient times, Amun, Ra, Olodumare, and many different names and other different traditions. We honor the creator. And also in modern times, you might know him or her and him as Allah, Buddha, Jesus, whoever you may call on. We want to give thanks to that spirit, that all creative force, that mighty Ashe. And if you agree with what's being said, traditionally we say ashe, it is so. You can say that's what's up, I'm feeling it. Nod your head, stomp your feet. But if you agree, let me get an ashe. Ashe. Next, we would like to honor those ancestors who were the first physical embodiment of the Creator. Those ancestors who we have no written record of, but those who created the foundation in which all people stand on. We honor those ancestors who created the first institution, which was the family, which we must remember. We honor those ancestors who created animal husbandry and organized and named the animals. We honor those ancestors who come from the South. We honor those ancestors who come in that Nubia, that central southern region. We honor those first ancestors who we don't have written record of, but we know they exist. We stand on their shoulders, and everyone will say. Next, we would like to honor those ancestors who build upon what their ancestors did, who remembered their ancestors, who learned from the good and the bad, and built mighty civilizations. We want to honor those ancestors who come out of Kemet, or what we call Egypt today. We honor those Nubians. We honor those ancestors who built the pyramids, which didn't start out as the pyramids we see today. They started out as mounds, and they weren't perfect, but they were perfect because they were part of a perfect process. We honor those ancestors who understood that speech was not through the words, but through our actions and what we did. It was what we created with our hands. It was through the drums. It was through what we manifested. We honor those ancestors who learned from that and eventually built the Great Pyramids. We honor those ancestors in West Africa who built great civilizations. We honor those ancestors who built Timbuktu. We honor those ancestors who created Mali. We honor those ancestors who understood that the spoken word had deference to the creative word, to the written word, the nomo, the spoken word. The creative word was all powerful, and the written word had deference. We honor the Dogon. We honor those ancestors who were traveling the stars, way before it is quote-unquote modern technology in these modern times. We honor our ancestors. We give thanks to them. We honor those ancestors in the Nile Valley civilizations who created mathematics, science, reading, and writing. And they put it so deep into all the pyramids so that one day we can remember, we can return and reclaim who we are. Because they said we've been through it before. We've already been through this before. We went through 400 years of disorder and chaos. And it was us, from Africans, from dark-skinned Nubians who reclaimed order and restored order. That we do with maintenance and restoration of peace was. We honor those ancestors who gave us a blueprint so that we can stand here today. We honor them. Everybody will say? Next, we'd like to honor those ancestors who had to undergo the many myopathies. Great tragedy. We honor those ancestors who had to go through myopathies that were created through nature taking its course in the Sahara Desert, becoming the Sahara Desert. We honor those ancestors who had to deal with the Hyksos and the aliens and their ways of infiltration. We honor those ancestors who had to deal with the Arab slave trade. Oftentimes we focus on the European, but we forget that they learned from someone who learned from someone. And so we have to honor those ancestors who fought, who bled, who died. We honor those ancestors who went through that myopathy. We honor the ancestors who went through the transatlantic slave trade. We honor those ancestors who were put on the bottom of those slave ships. Those on the bottom died, drowned in pieces, died
with the New Jersey Department of Corrections and has been detailed to the U.S. Marshals New York, New Jersey Fugitive Task Force for the past 8 years. He devotes a significant amount of his time to the mission of cultural enlightenment and upliftment. As a 20-plus year member of the grassroots organization African Echoes, Ollie McBride currently serves as the organization's programming coordinator, facilitating the appearances of noted scholars such as John Jay College of Criminal Justice professor and legal scholar Gloria J. Brown Marshall, J.D., Dr. Marta Marina Vega, president of the Caribbean Culture Center African Diaspora Institute, and Dr. Jared Bell, the author of I Mix What I Like, a mixtape manifesto. Mr. McBride is a native of Newark, New Jersey, and attended elementary and secondary schools in Newark. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a Master's in Administrative Science from Farley Dickinson University in Teaneck, New Jersey, with certifications in global leadership and administration and international studies, where he was afforded the opportunity to study at Roxton College in England and the University of Mendoza in Argentina. Mr. McBride has also studied in the countries of Haiti via the Haiti Support Project/Institute of the Black World think tank based in Brooklyn, New York, under the leadership of Dr. Ron Daniels, and Cuba with Dr. Maisha Ma'at's organization, the Ma'at Center. This brother has an extensive CV. I'm just going to get to this last paragraph. He is currently engaged in a writing project to author his first book on the topic of developing future generations of youth to become productive and creative contributors to society. It is my pleasure and a humbling experience to bring to the mic this young warrior, Jegna, also a member of ASCAC, Eastern Region, Brother Ollie McBride.
Hotep, everyone. Hotep, everyone. I wanted to make sure y'all, I know y'all were here when I came to the front door. I mean, let me tell you something. Philadelphia is putting Newark, New Jersey to shame, I'm telling you. You're putting Newark, New Jersey to shame. Give yourselves a round of applause for this gathering. Give yourselves a round of applause. I'm going to just get my disk drive together, then I'm going to go into the presentation. But before I begin anything, I want to ask the elders for permission to speak. Thank you, sir and ma'am. Okay. How y'all feel? Good. You look great. I want to say, first of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to even be considered to come down here and to give any types of presentation outside my hometown and outside our area. It's always a pleasure to come out and see African people, when and wherever, whether it be domestically, nationally, internationally, whatever. I just love to see our folk. And I also want to thank ASCAC Mid-Atlantic region for having me come down. As a matter of fact, I was just asked to be the researcher for the East region. And with all my degrees and all that good stuff, let me tell you something. Between that and getting my black belt from Shaquille School of Martial Arts, it's a pleasure. It's an honor and a pleasure to do those things because, as we know, when we go to school, we don't go to school to learn. We go to school to be trained. We go to school to be trained to work for someone else, to work for other people. I mean, if that's what you choose to do, that's good. We have to maintain some type of sustainability for our families and support our families, but at the end of the day, if we want to be around for the next 100 years, because that's how other groups of people think. They think about being in existence for the next 100 years, for the next 50 years. When Japanese people make products, they always think that this product is going to outlast their competition because they're competing with each other. They're competing against you, but they're competing with each other in order to remain relevant. So we always need to keep those things in its proper context. And I also want to talk about how we have to maintain communication with each other too. I met Brother Chills at the ASCAT conference at Howard University about 3-4 years ago. And we talked about us kind of collaborating with each other. I've already pretty much maintained communication with Africans in the South Jersey area, Trenton area, and of course we've always maintained communication with the New York City area. The organization that I represent, African Echoes, was actually born out of First World in Harlem. So First World actually is defunct now. And in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, that the reason why something like that can possibly happen because we don't have enough people that are involved in this struggle, that are involved in this theoretical and then this practical. So we need to kind of focus on getting more of our young people involved in this effort. That's why it's mandatory that my son videotape, he's going to switch that, he's going to do all of these things because he's going to be initiated the same way I was initiated into African Echoes. You know, that's our obligation. You know, these are the things that we need to do. So don't mind him running back and forth because that's his initiation process. Part of my initiation process when I came into African Echoes, I would come to the lectures and of course, you know, maintain security because we need security. And one of those processes in that Rites of Passage program was I was actually able to see Booker T. Coleman, also known as Baba Kamini, see him do his presentation at African Echoes, and hopefully he'll build on that. But you know, I was present when he came and he gave his presentation, and from our communication, and I hope I'm not giving too much away, but you know, I think he actually presented at African Echoes before First World. He presented at African Echoes before First World, and I always remember that. And this has kind of kept me on my trajectory. So it's a blessing. It's a blessing to even be up here 2 minutes before him. So respect to Baba Kamini. My presentation is actually a presentation taken from the one I did at ASCAT last year. And the title of it is actually a play on something, and it's ironic that I'm here in Philadelphia this afternoon doing it. But the name of it is Practice. We're talking about practice. African cultural and spiritual practicality coupled with research, historical, and theoretical possibilities. Let me just check. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay, gotcha. Okay. Oh, okay, say now. Everybody, the brother told me for everyone to turn off or put cell phones on vibrate. All right? I didn't do that, so I'll get it. I'll get it later on. It's on? Does everybody know where I got the first part of my title from? Oh, yeah. So, you know, practice. We're talking about practice. Not a game. Practice. We're talking about practice. So everybody knows that that's Allen Iverson, and that was his war that he had with Coach Brown when he played for the Philadelphia 76ers. And it was a big issue. And, you know, it's just unfortunate that, you know, these things become issues as compared to what's going on in our community or what's going on internationally. But even in that, I'm a fan of Allen Iverson. And I use that because it was so apropos to what I'm about to get into. And one thing that I do know is that in our community, we do need practice. We need practice with some things. And even though sometimes it seems as if we have the innate ability to do things better than other groups of people, it is our obligation to practice, to make things more practical, as opposed to what we have been doing. I think that sometimes when we thrive in certain areas, that we become a little arrogant, and we don't realize that unless we do these things all the time, unless they become rote in our lives, that we fall out of sync of what we're supposed to be doing. We fall out of sync. So those are just some things that we really need to pay attention to. Is it up? Is it up? Go to the next one. Bear with me, family. It's coming up. Next, just go to the next one. Everybody's familiar with these two ancestors here, right? Right? Who is Aminata Maseka? Help me out, family. Come on, help me out. Help me out. Huh? She is Abby Lincoln. Okay. And the reason why I have these two ancestors is because they're actually the crux of what I'm getting at. One is the fact that these two individuals, and I'll start with Aminata Maseka first, giving her respect and calling her by her African name. She was willing to pretty much lose out on her whole career based on her beliefs, based on her loyalty to her African foundation. I'm not sure if anybody has ever seen the interview that she did with the young lady where she asked, "Where are our African gods? Where are our African gods?" And she's actually talking about the fact that we take on the cultural baggage of everyone else. So in us taking on the cultural baggage of everyone else, we pretty much negate our own. We negate what we need to be taken care of. We negate the issues that we need to be a little more observant of. And Paul Robeson, another individual who pretty much his career was decimated by his relationship with individuals here in this country. And that's one thing that will happen when you talk about deifying your culture. I've been working in law enforcement for the past 18 going on 19 years. I started off as a senior corrections officer with the Security Threat Management Group Unit at Northern State Prison. It was the first institution in New Jersey where they actually introduced a gang unit. And in them introducing that gang unit, there were a lot of things that I won't go too much into that the community should have been, a little more participant as far as knowing about. I went on to internal affairs, and now it's defined as the Special Investigations Division. And then I went on to be detailed to the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force. But one thing I always say, whenever I stand in front of a group of people, is the fact that my dedication to being an African precedes that. It precedes me doing that, and I'll do my job, and I'll do what I'm supposed to do. In me being respectful and following the laws of my art, that's gonna come regardless. But I have to always think in the manner of who I am as an African and how these laws and things affect me. Because they do affect me. So I don't get around a bunch of people that don't look like me when we're doing our job and act like I'm a part of how they see things. I'm a part of their trajectory. Because when they go into different areas like suburban Maplewood or Short Hills or Millburn, they don't go in with the same veracity that they go into different neighborhoods in North. It's totally different. And I let it be known that when you go into these communities, and especially when you're dealing with our elders, that you give some respect when you go into these areas. Cut and dry. And I was conflicted a long time, as far as leaving and retiring from what I was doing, but I said that, you know what? There's a reason why I'm here. And in me being there, I have to be the voice. I have to be the symbol of being in that position and letting them know that I can do my job and do your job and still be an African. And I make no bones about it. I just spoke on a panel in New York at City College with Gloria J. Brown Marshall, and I let everybody know on the radio and on TV that I am an African. So those are important. Next one. It's important to do that. One of the issues that we have in the African scholastic and intellectual community, it has developed some of the most prolific scholars, first of all, in world history, post-civil rights, black power struggle, and post-colonial Africa within a historical, theoretical, and research-based context. We've been able to explore the depths of history from a criterion that has afforded us the opportunity to view the world through African lenses. Okay? We need to start viewing the world through an African lens. I know that I'm pretty much the pastor preaching to the choir, but a lot of times these things come into a process when we're examples to other people. Because there are just some people that just don't understand and don't get it, and that doesn't mean that we're above them. It's just that sometimes we just don't know. When I was on that panel the other night, I was going on about some of the solutions that we could have in our community. And I kept saying rites of passage. I kept saying that we need to develop more rites of passage programs in our community. And Gloria J. Brown Marshall said to me, you need to explain to the community what a rites of passage program is. So the crowd was about this size here. And I'm in Harlem. City College is in Harlem. And so I said, hey, listen, how many people know what a rites of passage program is? Nobody knew. Nobody had a clue. I'm in Harlem, USA. And that doesn't mean that that's indicative of the whole city, but it says that sometimes we need to kind of come down and ground with our brothers, like Walter Rodney said. We need to ground with our brothers and explain certain things. I think that a lot of reasons why our community is apprehensive about participating in a whole lot of things that affect us is because they just don't understand. And we always think that somebody else is going to do it. That's come sometimes me being the youngest person in African Echoes. I'm running back and forth. I'm calling everybody. I'm calling lecturers to come in. But we have to sometime come down in our language and get to a point where we can express in the language that people understood. And that kind of brings me to my next slide, which is, next one, Taji. Everybody know who this giant is, right? Can't see it? Okay. It's not Dick Gregory. It's actually one of Cabo Kameni's teachers. That's Dr. John Henry Clark.
Founder of ASCAP.
Yes, sir. He's one of the founders of ASCAP. And one thing about Dr. John Henry Clark, who was he was a giant intellectual. But I think what made him most popular in our community is the fact that he was able to explain the difficult in the most simplistic terms. He was able to explain the most difficult things in the most simplistic terms. Okay? He was a master historian, master orator, he was a writer, and he was the individual that I would put up as the individual that represented the historical context. Next one. Anybody familiar with this guy? I got fuzzy pictures on that one too. Amos Wilson. Theoretical context. I walk in the footsteps of Amos Wilson. Amos Wilson was a professor who worked in the penal institute, so he knew what was going on with our community who were behind the wall. So he worked with a lot of individuals who are going through reentry. I came in here not too long ago and I saw that they had different offices for reentry. But that's how come he was such a master at what he taught. Because he could write the theoretical because he was actually living it. He was actually living that. So I kind of walk in those same shoes. Brother asked me the other day, well, you're going to get your PI license once you retire? I got 6 years to go. I said, listen, I'm not messing with this no more. I've done as much as I can in this, and my thing is to do what I'm doing now full-time. I'm doing it part-time, but to do what I'm doing full-time. But he was always able to put things in a theoretical context. And then we have the master pharaoh, Everybody know who that is? Cheikh Anta Diop, the pharaoh. You know, he was a doctor, he was a physicist and spoke multiple languages. I think he spoke 8 languages, if I'm not mistaken. And he was the individual that developed the carbon data machine where he was able to measure the content of melanin. I mean, this is phenomenal. He was able to measure the melanin in mummies. I mean, imagine if our children were able to be on that path from the beginning instead of getting into later years, and it's just phenomenal. In any event, he is the research and more research guy. So now we got our historical, Baba John Henry Clark. Then we have our theoretical with Amos Wilson, and then we have the pharaoh, who looks like my father, a whole lot like my father, the research oriented guy, that's one. So a lot of times we get lost in translations. With an African historical, theoretical, and research-based perspective growing exponentially due to aforementioned scholars and a plethora of others, there was a time, in my opinion, these points were supposed to intersect more than they do. Systematically, some of the conduits for highlighting this perspective were destroyed. So I'll say that during the latter part of the 90s, mid-90s, there was an upsurge. You started to see it in the music. You started to see it in individuals that were drawn to information. Everybody was drawn to the information, you know, not just those individuals who were members of the Nation of Islam, but then people started to read literature by Dr. John Henry Clark. They started reading literature by Dr. Ben and Jacob Carruthers, all these individuals. And it's just me, and it's just my opinion. I don't really have the data, but I'm of the mind that a lot of those things, the people who control these systems, they saw that. So as time moved forward, you saw the disconnect. You saw that the information that was being given to the younger generation and people who were being drawn to information started to break down to the point where we're at right now. Next point. So now we got to get back to practice, practice, practice. Everybody familiar with who that is, right? Catherine Dunham. Besides a dancer, you know, I gave him a pound, but you know, when I was at the ASCAT conference, what I would do is I would give a book out to people who got the answer right. But I can't afford it right now, so I ain't got no book, so I can't afford it. But besides Catherine Dunham being a dancer, what else was she? Very good. Very good. She was a mambo. Yes, sir. She was a mambo. Umpalo, actually. Umpalo Mayombe. But she was a voodoo priestess. And if anybody knows the history of Catherine Dunham was a researcher. You know, she researched in Trinidad. She came back to the States. And people were so enamored by her research. I think the Ford Foundation, they were so enamored with her research, they actually wanted to give her money to start doing research. And she turned it down. She went to Haiti, and she became a Mambo priestess. So she was able to make the distinction between what works for her community, what was the best interest for her community, and what wasn't the best interest of her community. So she turned down that Ford Foundation money, and she became a Mambo priestess. And sometimes these are the decisions that we have to make when we want to be relevant in our community and we want to move forward in our community. So that's why I have her picture up, and I'm giving her veneration. Catherine Dunham, she was born on June 22nd, 1909. She was a dancer, choreographer, author, anthropologist, and social activist. She was also an initiate in voodoo in Haiti and was eventually made a Mambo. Dunham ultimately made the decision to pursue her dance career over Ford Foundation money for the research of African culture. Is anybody familiar with Democracy Now? Did anybody see the most recent episode of Democracy Now? There was a scientist. There was I forget what kind of scientist he was, but he was in the area of biology. And he was asked by a corporation to research a chemical called azatine. Now, from what he found over the years he had been studying this chemical, azatine, was that it was a chemical that actually caused male frogs to turn into female frogs. And it also made male frogs develop eggs. So to the point where it actually changed the sex. And this scientist also stated that the same reproductive cells that a frog has are the same reproductive cells that humans have. Now I'm saying, so when he found this information out, the corporations actually asked him to buy the information. He said, no, I'm going to publish this. I want the people to know. So it got to the point where they were actually intimidating him and threatening his life, threatening his wife's life, threatening his child's life. And his brother said, no, you can't get that. And I was saying to myself, wow, I'm listening to him and I couldn't really tell from the voice. I said, wow, they really messing with this guy. And it never dawned on me until about maybe 3 o'clock this morning when I was looking at Democracy Now! on Twitter that it was a brother. A brother, like an African brother. And I said, you know what, it's unfortunate, but now it makes sense. So the thing is, he was able to make the distinction regarding what works for our community and what doesn't. What works for our community is that the people know. The people know what azatine does, because azatine is one of the chemicals used in GMOs, specifically corn. So over a period of time, if you're doing this and you're eating corn, then, needless to say, at the end of the day, because what he also mentioned in the interview, at the end of the interview, was the fact that there are now studies that are coming out where men are suffering from the same thing that these frogs are suffering from. So again, it goes into what you make important in your life and what's important to you and what's important to the community of the people that you belong to, or are you going to just take the money and run? Next one. Azatine? I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's Azatine. But if you go online and you look for Democracy Now!, the episode that came on yesterday, it's right there. They also have an article that they produced, because he actually won. He got all the documentation and everything. But they actually have an article that they did with him in the New York Magazine on the whole issue. The New York Magazine. I actually have a link. You guys can hit me up on Facebook, and I'll be happy to give you the information, because another brother, I was trying to search where the article was at, and he hit me with the link. So at the end of the presentation, I'll give you my information, and I'll be glad to pass that on to you. But again, it just goes back to, what are we willing to do in our best interest? The obligation of this generation. Example, China. China, which has a long history as a civilization state, with 94% of that population still believing that they are one race. Han Chinese, Han, H-A-N, are obviously taking the historical, theoretical, and research of their past forward, evidenced by the most recent positioning for global domination, economics, and what? African land grab. So they're garnering their power based on how they connect, historically, theoretically, and research-based, or they're combining everything. They're combining everything to move forward. There's actually a book, I forget the gentleman's name, when I was in school in England, the book was actually out a year and a half before it got to the United States. It was called When China Will Rule the World. Not if China will rule the world, when China will rule the world. And that's actually where I got my information from regarding the Chinese. But that's one thing that's intrinsic within that culture, that a large percentage of them identify as one people. Whereas with us, we have all kinds of debates and arguments as far as how we're going to identify ourselves. And believe it or not, that's partially why we even got into the situation of being involved in the European transatlantic slave trade, because we couldn't find a way to unify. That's just human nature, but at the end of the day, when you look at the example that's being set by China right now, it's astonishing. 94% of them identify with the same group. When China will rule the world. Check that out. This is being done via an understanding of the meshing, like I said earlier, of the historical, theoretical, and research-based understanding of their position with everyday culture, cultural practices, and how it relates to other cultures. So at the end of the day, I can deal with you, but I will never ever deny my foundation. I'm not going to deny me being Chinese. I'll deal with you, do what I got to do while I'm in your home. When I go home, like Dr. Edward Nichols said, I'm going to take that Western stuff off. I'm going to wash off that European. I'm going to get into the culture known as being a Han Chinese. Many African people in the diaspora definitely understand the importance of evolving the trajectories of these fundamental concepts with the practice of culture, but not enough. So obviously, you guys are engaging right now. This is practicality right now. Being able to come out and get a dose of culture. Coming here and taking part in what's going on here and supporting the market. That's what we should do, and that's what we should do on the regular. That's part of African culture. The next one. Anybody familiar with this? This individual that would probably be to your right? Who is that? That's the Pope, right? We see that picture, we know exactly who that is. Without a question. Without a question, we know exactly who that is. And what is that on the left? I got fuzzy pictures, so I apologize for that. Is anybody familiar with that? Okay, that's the practice of them turning that river green during St. Patrick's Day. Right. Okay, that's a cultural practice. It may seem simple, it may seem fun, but these are cultural practices that those people engage in to deify the culture that they belong to. Okay? Now, for instance, we just had a conversation about Mambo priestess. I said that I was part of Palo Mayombe. Today is Saturday. When we talk about African traditional systems and African spiritual systems, what day is Saturday? Who represents Saturday? Okay, the Saturday, a little bit. Huh? Yes, but what else? Something simple for the people. The day Saturday is who? No, but a person, an Orisha. I didn't want to say Orisha because I gave it away. Shango. And that's kind of like what I'm talking about, us being able to rattle off our experiences and the things that are a part of our historical DNA. It's important. It's important. So the same way we look at a picture and we know it's the Pope. How many Catholics in here? Ain't no Catholics in here. but everybody knows who the Pope is. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to know because, like Dr. Clark said, that we need to know their history the same way we know our history. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with knowing that, but we need to get some balance and understand that we need to look at both things. Okay, next one. The meshing of the fundamentals of culture. Okay, with the installation of the new Pope, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, our fundamental senses should force us into a critical analysis of the bombardment via media of this so important event. With yearly events like St. Patrick's Day and others, how is our best interest served? Do we have any best interest served when we know who the Pope is? Do we get any gifts when we know who the Pope is? We don't get anything in particular. So if we don't get anything but a little pride of our history and understanding that we come from we come from the first civilizations, plural, then that should be enough for us to have an understanding of what we belong to as opposed to what other people venerate. Okay? So when we're talking about practice, next one, Ifa, Akan, Para, Palo, Candomblé, Santeria, Budun, are all African-based spiritual practices. African-based spiritual practices are one with culture, and many of the things we take for granted are derivatives or odes to the Orishas. Case in point, how many people got roots from down south? We all got roots from going down south. How many people said, how many people's parents or family said, don't put that hat in the bed? Don't put that hat in the bed. How many people said, wipe your feet before you go in the house? Wipe your feet before you go in the house. Wiping your feet before you go in the house is an ode to a labor. Okay? That's an ode to a labor. So again, we need to make these things practical. in our lives. We need to know these things. They make sense, because I'm gonna be honest with you. And trust me, I'm not challenging anybody's religious perspective, but I will say this. When I'm driving and I'm looking for a parking space, I give a shout out to a labor. Because a labor is the orisha of paths, of pathways. And you're asking him to open those pathways. Okay? You're asking him to open those pathways. So I'm driving, I'm like, a labor, listen, I will give you what you need if you give me some help. So this is what we do. So between giving veneration to the orishas, and specifically a labor when we're going inside of a house, you know, we also ask our ancestors. We also are asking our ancestors. So having communication with your orishas, having a communication with your ancestors. So it's practice, practice, practice. The next one. Good morning. Okay, and those are some of the examples. You know, you have the Akan. And the reality is that with a lot of those African spiritual systems, they're like almost the same. The same thing, just different names. Just different names, whether you're talking about Santeria, Candomblé, and you're comparing the Voodoo to the Voodoo that's practiced in Benin, the Voodoo and Haiti practice in Benin. I mean, it's all the same. It's all the same. And you know what, believe it or not, one thing I can say about African spiritual practices is that there's never a contradiction. If you feel like you still want to practice what Mama told you about being a Christian, you can do it. You can do it. You can still do it. So these are some of the things I think that we need to become a little more knowledgeable about when we talk about these practices. I'm telling you right now, at the end of the day, it's about us asking. That's all we got to do, us asking the ancestors for some help. We can thumb through these books all day. We can thumb through Dr. Ben's Africa's Influence on Major Western Religions. We can thumb through Amos Wilson's Black Power. We can thumb through Marumba Ani's Yurugu. But at the end of the day, you need to ask your ancestors, and I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm just saying that sometimes it's just a matter of us asking for some help. I need some help. I need some help. And finding a codified way of doing that. And I'm telling you, it works. I'm gonna share something with you. I ain't supposed to share it with you, but it is what it is. About maybe 3 years ago, I was involved in a shooting incident in Hackensack, New Jersey. There was a young gentleman, he was 21 years old. His name was Trayvon, believe it or not. Trayvon Johnson. That was his name, Trayvon Johnson. As a matter of fact, doing the genealogy with my family, Trayvon Martin, the young gentleman that was murdered, is actually a fifth cousin of mine. In any event, we're making a hit into this household, and I go to the door and I say to him, I say, hey, listen, I'm probably your only friend out here. But I keep it real. I keep it real. I say, listen, I'm probably your only friend out here. You need to come out. And he never came to the door, so they were talking about taking the door. And he didn't take the door because the superintendent came and said, I have a key. So I was the front man going in, you know, and I like to sometimes be the front man because it quells different. They know how I feel about how you interact with our people. They know. You're not going to go in and do what you want to do when you go in. In any event, we go inside the dwelling, and the young guy had the chain in the door once we open the door, and he shoots at me. He shoots at me 7 times. 7 times. He shot at me 7 times, and he never hit me. He never hit me either time. And we didn't even realize that he had been shooting until we did a transmission to the team in the back. And we did the transmission to the team in the back, and they said, no, it's shooting going on inside that household, and it's coming from the front of the dwelling. So we were like, wow. So he shot 8 more times. And so we went back to the bottom landing. And when we went back to the bottom landing, he pretty much said, I'm not coming out alive, and I have a child. Okay? So at that point, you know, everything's high. Stakes are high at this point. So it was a stand-up for about maybe 3.5 hours. They swapped the team out. They had the professionals go in. They had the SWAT team go in. They had the negotiator from the Hackensack go in. So they're talking to him in a language that he probably doesn't even understand. So what wound up happening was they called me. I was up the street. They called me, and they said, Ali, come here, man. We need you to go back in here and talk to this guy. And I'm going to tell you something. That day, and I'm not saying this for here, because I've said this plenty of times, I knew that something like this was going to happen. I kind of knew something like this was going to happen. And I was very apprehensive initially about going back in, but then I said to myself, I already know that it's a young guy. They're going to probably kill him. So I had to take some type of responsibility to try to quell some of this stuff down. So I went inside and I immediately said, what's going on, Trayvon? And he said, Assalamu alaikum. And the reason why he did that is because when I initially went to the door, I said, Aki, I'm probably your only friend. And we know what Aki means. Aki means brother in Arabic. So he was under the assumption that I was Muslim, which is a good assumption at this point. So as I talked to him, we talked for about maybe 30 minutes, and I said to him, listen, I've been to many masjids in my life. I've been to Masjid Muhammad downtown Newark. Al-Haq on Springfield Avenue, but at the end of the day, the world is my masjid, and if you are truly a Muslim, then I would say that you might want to do things a little differently. I said, the world is my masjid. And at that point, he said to me, you know what, I'm coming out. He said, but just do me a favor. Do Ali. I said, Ali, don't let them kill me. So I don't know what I was thinking. It had to have been Ogun, because Ogun said, listen, don't let him come out. Go inside. I said, listen, this is what I'm going to do for you. I need you to lay down on your stomach, and I'm going to come inside. Because understand, if he would have come to the door, and it's still in the court, so I won't go too deep into it, but you can pretty much fill in the rest. So I went inside, he was on his stomach, and I walked him out. Now, the reason why I tell that story is because 3 days prior to that, I was at a birthday ceremony for an individual who practiced leukemia. And one of the brothers, young brother, said to me, not to me, as a matter of fact, he was making an offering to the Orishas. And he said, I want to pray for the brother in the back. I want to pray for that brother in the back that he never ever has to use his weapon, and that a weapon is not used against him. I never met this guy a day in my life. Never met this guy a day in my life. So I went to him after the ceremony was over. The ceremony was like 4 or 5 hours. I mean, it was long and drawn out. But I went to him afterwards. I said, you know what? I just want to thank you for saying that. He said it was just something that came over me to say that to you. And 3-4 days later, this incident happened. So again, matter of fact, right after that, maybe a month after that, I became an initiate, maybe for the wrong reasons, but I became an initiate in Palo Mayombe. Because I felt like I pretty much owed it to that. And that's the beautiful thing also about African spiritual systems, that if you're in Palo, that doesn't mean that you can't go practice Ifa. If you're in Ifa, that doesn't mean that you can't go practice Budan. But at the end of the day, we need something to pretty much give us some protection. And that's not to say that you can't be a Buddhist or a Christian either, because sometimes if you go get a reading, and if an individual has been practicing that, they might say, listen, you do what you've been doing. If it's working for you, let it work for you. But we still need to have an understanding of these spiritual systems because they work for us. Sometimes they used to say this thing called, the old people say that, we got magic. We do. We literally have magic. On the screen now is Apollo pot, and matter of fact, the next one, Taji. That's Apollo pot when I was in Cuba, in Matanza, and they have a whole museum dedicated to African spiritual systems. So if you want to learn about the Abakwa, which you can only be initiated in Nigeria and Cuba, you want to talk about Palo Mayombe, Santeria, all of those things are in Matanza. That's where all of the Babalaos go when you go to Cuba. This is practice. This is one of the Yoruba theaters that they have there. This is where we went the last night while we were there. So this is a part of who they are, and they give this same play every night. This same play, they tell a story about all of the Orishas, and they give that same one every night. As a matter of fact, the young ladies behind them, it's the first female bata group ever. So they all play bata, and they play just as great as the drummers you got here. I mean, they some thorough sisters. That's right. So practice, we need to practice. There are a lot of things that we can do to deify our culture, to practice our culture, whether it be Congo, whether it be Afro, Cuban rumba, just different things from all kinds of things, Orisha dances. We need to take part in our culture. So Granted, this is taking part in our culture here, listening to someone share their perspective on things that we need to get with. But the same way, there are other things that we can do and that we can introduce to our children. For instance, what is this? Anybody familiar with what that is? What is that? Not you. You can't get that. Anybody know? Say it again, sister. There you go. So you know, everybody know, but it's just a matter of actually, it's Worry or Mancala. You know, I'm giving everybody an assignment. There's no reason why all of our children should not know what this game is. It's called Worry. It's actually two games on that board. Worry, W-A-R-R-I, and Mancala, M-A-N-C-A-L-A. Worry and Mancala. Our children should be able to say, I know it. The same way they know what checkers and chess is, they should be able to identify with Worry and Mancala as well. Okay? That's just a part of that practice that Allen Iverson was not talking about, actually. Next one. And my favorite topic, and I'll finish this up so we can bring Kaba up. My favorite topic, of course, are rites of passage programs. And I know with this crowd, we know what rites of passage programs are, right? Right. I'm telling you, the key to a lot of our problems in the community are rites of passage programs and one, Sankofa. We call them Sankofa circles in Newark. And what I mean by Sankofa circles is that despite me working the hours that I do, I make it mandatory that I'm at Science High School in Newark at 11 o'clock every Saturday morning. I take Taji to a STEM program at the University of Medicine and Dentistry at 9 o'clock, and I hang out a little bit, go get something to eat, and I make it mandatory that I am present to teach at this Sankofa Circle. A Sankofa Circle is African history. That's all it is, and it seems like it's something simple, but believe me it's major. So between Sankofa Circles and between rites of passage programs, not just for boys, but for females as well, we know that there has been a 500% increase in young women going into the prison industrial complex. A 500% increase. In the early 1990s, there were a little more than 300,000 people incarcerated. Now we have well over 2 million. And I don't have to tell any of you what the majority of that population is. Okay? I don't have to reiterate that. But one solution is, of course, like I said, rites of passage programs. And I actually sent out a challenge to Brother Allen that we want to start competing. I already started mine. We got the STEP program, but I'm starting one. To be fair, I'm starting a rites of passage program, and Hotep rites of passage program alum. Let us make man. These are one of the solutions that we can actually circumvent a lot of the issues that plague our community. Next one. And a lot of these folk on here, that's Baruti Kafeli. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Baruti Kafeli. He actually was a vice principal at North Tech High School. Turned that school around, made it a blue ribbon school. He gave it up to speak full time, talking about different ways that our men, our young boys, can compete. Ways that our young men can get into the flow of finishing something, finishing school, etc., etc. And that's also Dr. Kalfani. He's actually the director for the Africana Institute, where we're going to have the ASCAT conference in Newark in March. So that's Dr. Kalfani there. And the brother next to Dr. Kalfani, I was actually with him this morning at our Sankofa Circle, is the son of the brother on the far right, Baruti Kafeli. He has the same name. Very intelligent brother. But what happens is we have a gathering every year doing Kwanzaa, on the first Saturday of Kwanzaa. And everybody meets together and they go through a part of their rites of passage program. So they got about maybe 20, 25 boys. They've been doing it every year for the past 10 years. With no corporate money whatsoever, they feed the community. Almost similar to what Bayana Bailo does in Haiti, when she feeds the masses that Haitian soup. So again, sometimes it's about asking the ancestors for help. The next one. And I'm gonna finish it up real quick. And these are just pictures from the rites of passage program. The next one. And the next one. So, in conclusion, it's our obligation to mesh the historical, theoretical, and research of our memory with everyday cultural practices. Not to compartmentalize any of the aforementioned, but to put them in a context where there is no separation. Let us continue to network, share what we know, to bake the whole pie. So I'll just leave you with this. And this is from a family member of mine. You might be familiar with him, Baba James Small. How can you claim that you want to be free when the one thing you'll be when you're free is the one thing you don't want to be? And that's an African. One more, Amos Wilson, gotta say this. To manipulate history is to manipulate consciousness. To manipulate consciousness is to manipulate possibilities. And to manipulate possibilities is to manipulate power. It's Amos Wilson. And I got one more, because we're talking about practice. God gives us all the divine intuitiveness to know the difference between right and wrong. Me. Thank you.